Hello, I'm Dr. Muhammad Asif. I welcome you to my channel. In this video, I will discuss what is deconstruction. I will give you a crux of deconstruction and some major premises as well. This is the breakdown of today's lecture. First, I will discuss some premises. Then, I will focus on construct and what's the relation between deconstruction and construct. Then, difference as deconstructive tool. Deconstruction as theoretical framework, and deconstruction as methodology or double reading. And finally, I will give you an example how deconstruction can be applied using the popular binary of Caliban and Prospero. So let's start. Deconstruction or crux. Deconstruction has two modes. First is obvious mode. In obvious mode, it focuses on the surface of the text, looking for contradictions, gaps, constructs, constructions, stereotypes, actions, behaviors, presences, absences, hierarchies, oppositions, and binaries. So, in obvious mode, deconstruction focuses on the text, on the surface of the text, what the text demonstrates explicitly, what is the most obvious about the text, and deconstruction tries to catch the text on its face value. The next is hidden mode. It looks for the logic, logos, ideologies, beliefs, philosophies, knowledge, reason, politics, culture, agendas, centers, roots, systems, rules, and regulations. So, in hidden mode, the focus becomes more subtle. We try to dig out the invisible forces that create the obvious mode, and finding out the hidden structures that result in the manifest structure is not an easy job. It requires critical approach, it requires deep knowledge, and it requires wider understanding of the text and its context. Now I gave you three major premises of deconstruction. First is language is dynamic, ambiguous, and unstable, continually disseminating possible meanings. The base of the first premises is Sassou's famous sentence that in language there are only differences without positive terms. And from this sentence, we derive another sentence that language is differential and relational. When we say that language is differential, it means language works on the principle of difference, which Derrida calls as difference. And as you know, difference stands for two words to differ and defer. And it means that meaning is always deferred and delayed, and meaning is the product of difference. And difference is actually a negation of logos. Logos gives meaning stability, logos gives meaning credibility, logos makes language meaningful. And when there is no logos and there is only difference, then language as a medium of communication loses its much of sanctity. Next is existence has no center, no stable meaning, no fixed ground. Why? As I told you earlier, that earlier it was believed that there was a logos, there was a center that held everything tightly and that did not allow things to fall apart. But now that center has been decentered and it has been replaced by difference. And difference acts as a volcano, and it is like an earthquake. It does not allow anything to settle down. Third, human beings are fragmented battlefields for competing ideologies whose only identities are the ones we invent and choose to believe. Now, this is very important. Earlier, it was believed that identity resides in the individual. Now, after difference and after Derrida's focus on presence and absence, we realize that identity does not reside in ourselves. Rather, we derive our identity from our difference from the other. In other words, self derives its identity from the other. Now, as identity is based on language, and language itself has lost its credibility, and it is no longer the same sacred language, and it is not a coherent whole. So the identity that language produces, that too cannot be coherent, that too cannot be single, that too cannot be stable. It is bound to be fragmented. Before discussing deconstruction further, I would like to discuss two words, two very important words, construction and construct, which are actually part of deconstruction. So, first, I would discuss construction. The action of building something, typically a large structure. Now, when we think that deconstruction consists of two parts, that is D plus construction, actually the image that we get, that is of a building, of a large structure. And the other meaning of this construction, that is the creation of an abstract reality that goes to the background, that does not come to our mind first. The other meaning, the creation of an abstract entity, language plays a large part in our construction of reality. Even this limits uh, deconstruction to language only. So, in this way, when we focus on the word construction, we believe that reality is constructed only by language, whereas this is not the case. I think the other important word is construct. I think when we discuss deconstruction, we should have construct in our mind as part of the word deconstruction rather than construction. Now let's look what is construct. Construct is an idea or theory containing various conceptual elements, typically one considered to be subjective and not based on empirical evidence. Now, two words here are very important. The first word is subjective. Subjective means that constructs are not natural, that constructs are not objective, that they are cultural. And another thing is that they are not based on empirical evidence. Now, what is empirical? Empirical is from empiricism. Empiricism means knowledge gained through observation and experience. This means knowledge gained through five senses. Or, in other words, empirical evidence is something that can be verified, something that is tangible, something that is manageable. So, what we find from this definition of construct is that construct is subjective, it is neither objective nor natural. Now, next definition is to set in logical order. Now, it appears very innocuous, but when we look at the word logic, then it becomes very political because logic, as Foucault has exposed, that logic plays in the hands of the power, that logic carries with itself power, that the powerful has his own logic. That is the reason that all the ordering and all the boundaries that we find in this world, they are product of power play, and there is a logic behind that. Why? Because they have been justified on the basis of reason and logic, science, philosophy, knowledge, all these things. So we find logical order only because there is some power play. So if we believe that construct shows some logical order, then this order is definitely not neutral or objective or something that is absolute. Rather, it is cultural, rather, it is ideological. Next definition is an idea or theory containing various conceptual elements, typically one considered to be subjective and not based on empirical evidence. The underlying constructs, beliefs, philosophy, which influence action and behavior. Now, here, two things are very important: beliefs and philosophies. They relate to hidden mode of deconstruction, and action and behavior, they relate to obvious mode of deconstruction. Now, one thing should be very clear, that we cannot study the obvious mode in isolation of the hidden mode. As a matter of fact, we cannot separate the obvious from the hidden. They both go side by side, they both determine each other, and they both are the result of one and other. So, in this way, we find that constructs, they are political, they are cultural, they are ideological, and they reflect the powers, and they also reflect the imbalance of power. Another definition: a construct in the philosophy of science is an ideal object where the existence of the thing may be said to depend upon a subject's mind. So, in other words, construct does not have any relevance in the real world. It does not exist in the real world. It is a separate something that is separate from the reality. This contrasts with the real object. This contrast with the real object means that construct does not have anything to do with the reality, where existence does not seem to be depend on the existence of the mind. In other words, constructs, they depend upon the essence and not existence, or in other words, they don't have any direct one-to-one relation with the real world. And the problem arises when we try to use, or when we use these constructs to describe the real objects, the real life, the real world. So, how can we deconstruct a construct? First, identify a construct. Second, dig up its cultural or ideological roots. Third step, identify the center in the construct. Fourth, identify the power play and binary. And last, expose the binary to be cultural and not natural. Now I come to difference as deconstructive tool. Derrida argues that language has two important characteristics. Its play of signifiers continually differs or postpones meaning. Second, the meaning it seems to have is the result of the differences by which we distinguish one signifier from another. So, this is actually the interpretation of the word difference. That meaning is the product of difference, that meaning is always deferred. It means that meaning is not stable, that we cannot achieve a stable final meaning. He combines the French words for to defer and to differ to coin the word difference, which is his name for the only meaning language can have. Or, in other words, Derrida believes that language can never have any final meaning. With language, we can improvise. At this point, one may wonder why use language at all if it seems to refer to a kind of stable meaning that does not really exist. So, if language does not convey a stable meaning, then why do we use language? We must use language, Derrida explains, because we must use the tool at our disposal if we don't have another. So he is talking here of appropriation, that we have no alternative. We have language and there is no other alternative, and we are bound to use it, and we must use it. But then we should use it reflexively. Reflexively implies that we must be aware of the limits and limitations of language when we use it. But even while we use this tool, we can be aware that it does not have the solidity and stability we have assumed it has. So, this is self reflexivity, that when we use language, we should be aware of its limits and we can therefore improvise with it, stretch it to fit new modes of thinking. An activity he calls bricolage, that is, construction or creation from a diverse range of available things. So, this idea that language does not have stable meaning, actually, it strains our minds. It puts more pressure on ourselves because we have to stretch ourselves to control the language and to control its implications, knowing that language is not stable, knowing that language can be interpreted variously, one has to be more careful using it. Another thing is, as language does not refer to outside reality, it implies that language can create reality. If language creates reality or can create reality, then whoso has the power has the advantage of creating reality through language. So, language in its destabilized form becomes more dangerous. So, deconstruction, it serves two purposes. The first thing is that it has decentered the earlier solid and stable stereotypes, binaries, and it has decentered the centers. The other thing is, it also shows that language can create new centers as well that may be different and that might be difficult to identify. Now, I will discuss deconstruction as a mode of interpretation. Deconstruction as a mode of interpretation works by a careful and circumspect entering of each textual labyrinth. What does it imply? It implies that when we study a text, we must enter into its argument. That argument is always going to be complex and complicated. It will not be easy to enter inside the argument. The deconstructive critic seeks to find, by this process of retracing, the element in the system studied which is illogical, the thread in the text in question which will unravel it all, or the loose stone which will pull down the whole building. So, what does it imply? That when a critic enters the text, he tries to identify the blind spots in the text, the aporias in the text, the missing links, the gaps, the cracks in the text that have the potential of dismantling the whole text. Text already dismantled. The deconstruction annihilates the ground on which the building stands by showing that the text has already annihilated the ground, knowingly or unknowingly. This is the same thing as we say that text deconstructs itself. The very act of creation is also an act of decreation. Deconstruction is not a dismantling of the structure of a text, but a demonstration that it has already dismantled itself. So, deconstruction shows that one does not have to dismantle the text because the very structures that create it, they dismantle it. Now I will discuss deconstruction as theoretical framework. Now, when you use deconstruction as theoretical framework, and here in this slide, I am talking in more general terms. It's not related only to literature, but to most of the social sciences. Now, how deconstruction operates as theoretical framework? Let's see. See the world, your data, and yourself as a text, with all that implies. For example, that there is no direct access to reality, other people, or even one's self. So the most important thing is that there is no direct access to reality. Why? Because our only access to reality is through language. Now we have understood and realized the limits and limitations of language, that language cannot describe reality. Or, in other words, the moment language describes reality, it kills reality. Or, in other words, still, it kills the referent. Why it kills the referent or how it kills the referent? Because referent that was prior to its representation in language existed in the real world. Now it has entered the domain of the text. It has become textual, and now it has become delinked from the referent that is outside the world. So the moment a language describes something or represents something, it loses its connection with that. So, what does it mean? It means that language cannot describe reality. As Lacan said, that our recognition is based on misrecognition. In the same way, we can say that our understanding is basically based on misunderstanding, that we don't have direct, unmediated access to reality. Unmediated, why? Because language itself is mediated by culture, religion, ideology, and the power play. So, in this way, reality becomes casuality, that we cannot access it, that we cannot represent it, that we cannot define it, that we cannot describe it. The next thing is, look for the binary opposition in text, which might be interview transcripts, observation notes, questionnaire returns, documents, your own biases and assumptions, and worry away at them, put pressure on them. So focus on everything, try to find contradictions, try to find the obvious mode, try to find the hidden mode, and then try to find the gap between the obvious and the hidden. You will be able to find the aporias, you will be able to find the gaps, and you will be able to dismantle some of the assumptions that were not challenged before. And then next, challenge the taken for granted, not in a destructive spirit, nor in the hope that you will reveal some deeper truths, but in order to open up textual spaces. So, this is actually the function of deconstruction. It opens up textual spaces that seem closed or contrariwise, to tangle up or confound things that seem to intend on keeping their distance. So in deconstruction, we try to open up the textual spaces, and we try to find those elements and those politics of the text that remain hidden from the readers and that remain hidden from the spectators because of certain ideological and cultural reasons. Now I come to literary texts. How can we apply deconstruction to literature and literary texts? And there are a number of possibilities. Deconstruction can be used both as a theoretical framework, and deconstruction can also be used as a methodology. So when we are using deconstruction either as theoretical framework or as methodology, we need to look at the following things. In a literary text, look for the gaps, cracks, fissures, silences, absences, presences, excesses. Look for themes, stereotypes, boundaries, motives, motivation, similes, metaphors, examples. Characters, their roles, their status, their value system, their names, their genders, colors, settings, language. Writer's context, text context, reader's context. Power in the text, assumptions, givens, not givens. Economic system, history, culture, and you may add environment here. All this can be summed up in the following categories. That when we study a text, we need to focus on the following: race, gender, class, region, religion, caste, and history. And by identifying the elements that relate to any of these important constructs, we can apply a relevant theory and we can use deconstruction as methodology. Now, how deconstruction works as methodology? One way to begin is to follow Derrida's own process, which he called double reading. That is, you first go through a text in a traditional manner, pointing out where it seems to have determinate meanings. So the first reading is the surface reading. The first reading is the traditional reading in which we go for the obvious themes, meaning, message, or the traditional approaches with which we look at the aesthetic aspects of the text, etc. On second reading, you would question what is accepted as natural or self-evident. So second reading is actually interrogative reading, a reading in which we question everything, looking to find places where the attitudes or assumptions identified on first reading are contradicted or undermined. So here we try to identify the contradictions within the text. When incompatible meanings are brought to light, the text deconstructs itself. So, the proper function of deconstruction is to find the incompatibilities within the text. These incompatible meanings undermine the grounds on which the text is based, and meaning becomes indeterminate. So, what does deconstruction do? It undermines the grounds. And what are those grounds? Those grounds are logocentric, that it dismantles the logos, freeing the text from its center. The text is not unitary and unified in the manner that logocentrism promises. Recognizing that a text has multiple interpretations, the reader expects to interpret it over and over again. So once we do away with logos, logocentrism is gone and replaced by difference, then things fall apart, then meanings fall apart, then all the hinges on which the text stood stable, those hinges are gone. Now I give you example how can we apply deconstruction, and very simple example and very popular one. We have a famous binary of Caliban and Prospero. Now you can deconstruct my approach here as well, that I am talking from a post-colonial perspective, not from a colonial perspective. So whatever we do, that can be deconstructed. So let's move on. Shakespeare's naming politics deconstructed. Did Shakespeare use any politics while naming his characters? Let's see. An etymology one I find more convincing is that Caliban's name is related to the word cannibal. Shakespearean scholars since the late 18th century have noticed that Caliban's name is an anagram of the Spanish spelling of this word, cannibal. We can date with precision the day that this word first came into contact with European languages, since it's a loan word from the Caribbean and is first recorded in Christopher Columbus's journal of his first voyage to the New World. When Shakespeare named Caliban, did he have in mind the noble savage crushed by European colonization, or was he instead thinking of a nefarious man eater who would kill his neighbors given the chance? So, the name Caliban is very political. Why political? That Caliban appears to have been derived from cannibal. Or simply put, that Shakespeare has used Caliban for his other in the play, The Tempest. Now let's see how he describes the Western characters. The Western character is Prospero, a name for a person or thing likened to Prospero, especially with reference to being capable of magic or to influencing the behavior or perceptions of others without their knowledge. And if we look at the word Prospero, with the two words that come to our mind, they are prosper and prosperity. Caliban Prospero binary. Now let's analyze this binary. What are its reasons and why Shakespeare used this Caliban Prospero binary? One reason is Renaissance culture. Both Annie Lumba's and Stephen Greenblatt's work shows that Renaissance was also about race. There was strong race consciousness among the Europeans in the early modern period. Then that was the early period of Orientalism, and that there was the germination of the ideas about colonies and colonization, about race and slavery, and the concept of other was there. And behind all these concepts, there was power. Okay. And during the Renaissance, all the stereotypes about the other that were used earlier by the Greeks, they were re-employed. And then we find the politics of colonization, of domination, of subjugation, of exploitation. So, in this way, when we deconstruct this Caliban Prospero binary, we find a large number of social, cultural, political, economic factors, reasons that actually shaped this binary. Conclusion. Deconstruction can deconstruct any text. Deconstruction. Hidden mode is very important. Deconstructing constructs and binaries without a recourse to hidden structures makes deconstruction a mere textual analysis, which is against the spirit of deconstruction. As a matter of fact, both obvious and hidden modes of deconstruction go side by side, and they should not be separated from each other while discussing any text. And the upshot of today's discussion is, as the Shakespeare's Caliban Prospero binary demonstrates, that deconstruction is political by default. Thank you very much.